On January 4th, 1953, a Stanley Park Board employee, Albert Tong, was out on patrol. During his round, he walked onto a patch of leaves that made an odd crunching sound. Curious about what was under the pile, he began to dig. After a moment, the employee realized what he was stepping on. Under his feet were numerous bones embedded in the earth. The man notified the police immediately, and the next day investigators arrived and began to piece together a truly gruesome crime. Today I would like to delve into the nearly 70-year-old case, nicknamed the Babes in the Woods. A quick warning before we begin. During this video, I will discuss how the children were murdered, as well as other details you may find a bit hard to hear, including who indeed may have committed the crime. Now, without further ado, let's begin. When authorities arrived, they began to dig. After uncovering branches, dirt, leaves, and other debris, they then unearthed a decomposing woman's fur coat. Underneath the coat, they found the remains of 2 children, as well as a layman's hatchet, which later turned out to be the murder weapon. They also found ripped and torn pieces of children's clothing, a woman's size 7.5 penny loafer shoe, a rusted-out metal lunchbox, and 2 leather aviator caps. One of the skulls matched a wound that the blade of the hatchet would produce, while the other matched a wound from the hatchet's hammering end. Immediately after the remains were found, it became a major news story, not just in Vancouver, but across North America. Photos of clothing and other objects found were posted in the paper. Missing person cases from around the continent were also checked, and a plaster cast of the skulls were made. Unfortunately, no one came forward to claim or identify the remains. In 1996, Brian Honeyborn came across the Babes in the Woods case. Since then, he continued to look into the files, even after his retirement in 2001. During his time, he has poked holes in some of the earlier findings, one of them being the year of the murder. Originally, it was thought that the 2 were murdered 6 years prior to the remains being found. They came to this conclusion by looking at the debris and brush laying over their bones. However, Honeyborn believes they could have been killed much earlier. Everything was wrapped up on the scene in one day. They counted leaves and deciduous matter that had fallen on the ground. You can't really go by that. There was no botanist called in. That was the best guess, that it happened in 1947. Another reason being that they were wearing a shoe that was made prior to the war. Another groundbreaking discovery he made was he decided to re-extract teeth and DNA from the bones of the victims. He found out that the 2 shared the same mother, but different fathers. And even more shocking, the remains were not of a boy and a girl, but of 2 boys. This is important because the police asked the public if they saw a woman with a boy and a girl in the park in 1947, instead of 2 boys. The police asked the public if they saw a mother in Stanley Park with a boy and a girl around 1947. There were hundreds of tips. Unfortunately, the leads mostly proved to lead nowhere. However, there were a few leads that Honeyborn pursued over the years. One being a woman who stayed in the New Haven Hotel with 2 young boys but then suddenly disappeared. Another being a woman from Misson who hitchhiked to Stanley Park with her 2 young boys. The boys were wearing aviator helmets. Someone reported a prostitute who lived with her father and two young boys in a house by the lighthouse at Prospect Point in Stanley Park. Finally, there are two accounts that Honeybourne believes are the best leads the case has ever gotten. A woman and a man was seen with two kids at Stanley Park with a hatchet. The woman was said to have disappeared into the woods with the kids and the man. She returned later with only the man. She also had blood all over her legs when she returned. Finally, in May 1944, there was a sailor from Eskimo and his fiancée walking along the seawall when a woman crashed out of the bush in front of them, wearing just one shoe and no coat, and letting out a guttural sound. According to the report at the time, she took off running. Honeybourne passed this information off to Vancouver police, who checked school records to see if any boys went missing in May of 1944. Unfortunately, these accounts happened so long ago, none of them have led to an arrest. Through clothing they were discovered in, and DNA testing, investigators believe they know a fair bit about the lives of the boys. The first being that they were between the ages of 6 and 10 years old. They were wearing aviator caps, and during this time it's most likely that their father was serving in the war, and were possibly grieving his loss. Based on the clothes found at the scene, they most likely came from a working class family. Their mother would have also been working during the time of the war to support herself and her children. After the war was finished, she may have lost her job after soldiers returned, which may have made it nearly impossible to support herself and her two children. In the 1940s, someone took two little boys deep into the Stanley Park woods and brutally murdered them with a hatchet. The killer then gently wrapped their body in a woman's fur coat and buried the coat with debris. Many believe the mother of the boys was responsible for their death. One of the theories is that she was employed during the Second World War. Unfortunately, sometime during the war, her husband either left her or lost his life. When the war was over, she may have lost her job to one of the returning soldiers. Without a means to take care of her children, and the stress of not knowing where her next meal would come, she may have suffered a mental breakdown and decided to end her children's lives instead of watching them starve. The way the coat was gently placed around the bodies could show remorse for what they have done. Since the murders happened over 70 years ago, the killer is most likely long dead and will never face justice for what they have done. While researching this story, I came across a website called Eve Lazarus. On the site, there is a story featuring Kat Thorson, a woman studying psychology and forensics. After attending an event hearing Honeybourne speak about the case, she offered to volunteer her services, and over the next year, she teamed up with Honeybourne and a forensic dentist named David Sweet, and finally an investigative reporter named George Garrett. Kat believes that if the mother did indeed murder her children, she would have most likely killed herself in the upcoming days. Searching the papers, she came across the suicide of a 23-year-old woman, an Irish Catholic woman who traveled between Edmonton and Vancouver during the war. She ended her life by jumping from the Georgia Viaduct. She had 2 children and was headed west in 1947. Her timeline did match what was originally thought to be the year the 2 children were murdered. This could potentially be the 2 boys' mother. However, it's most likely we will never know, and the case of the babes in the woods will more than likely never be solved. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was my first time doing a true crime story, so I'm not exactly sure how well it turned out. I also left out some details about the case, as I didn't want the video to be too long. However, if you want me to add as much info on the cases as possible, I will of course be happy to do that. Please let me know what you think, and if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing to not miss another video, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I hope to make more videos for you soon. A quick update to this story. I actually made this video around 2 years ago, and recently the case of the 2 murdered children have finally been solved. The identities of the 2 boys are David and Derek Dalton, aged just 6 and 7 years old. In 2021, investigators obtained a DNA sample from each of the boys' skulls, and enlisted the help of Redgrave Research Forensic Services, a Massachusetts-based forensic genetic company. The Redgrave team was able to identify the maternal grandparents of one of the boys and construct a family tree by comparing the victim's DNA to people who had submitted their DNA to private companies for genetic testing, such as 23andMe. Police say they believe the person who killed the brothers was likely a close relative who died approximately 25 years ago. After 7 decades as a cold case, we presume that the person who killed Derek and David had likely passed away, Weidman added. But at this stage in the investigation, it was never about seeing someone charged for these crimes. It was always about giving these boys a name and finally telling their story. I'm proud to be part of the team that has done that. So there you have it, the sad, tragic, and disturbing case of the Babes in the Woods and the brutal murder that haunted Canada for nearly 70 years.